Habits of Happiness is sponsored and hosted by the Mindful Life program. The Mindful Life program helps people engage in life in healthy and meaningful ways, reducing stress while cultivating genuine happiness. They offer programs locally, internationally, and online. More information at www.mindfullifeprogram.org or 970-633-0163.
Habits of Happiness is also sponsored by Paradise Bakery, located in the heart of Aspen on the corner of Galena and Cooper. A favorite hangout since 1981. Famous for fresh-baked cookies and muffins, serving homemade Italian-style ice cream, lattes, and fine coffees. Open daily from 6:30 a.m. to 11 p.m.
Hello, and thanks for joining us with Habits of Happiness. I'm John Bruna.
And I'm Laura Bartels, and together we run the Mindful Life program. Based in Carbondale, Colorado, and we offer programs around this area in the Roaring Fork Valley, around the United States, and with our co-founder, Mark Maloney, who's from Australia, who we had the great honor of having with us in our last show. That was such a wonderful chance to have Mark here in the U.S. and here in on the episode with us. We talked about obstacles of happiness last time, and Mark did a great discussion about some obstacles that he sees. We talked about busyness, certainly that being one that gets many of us and trips us up. We talked also about the habit that we have of delaying sustainability, personal sustainability. And we also talked about trying to make certain those things that we really can't make certain. So some of the common obstacles to happiness. And I thought today we could continue talking about obstacles, but really now talk also about transforming obstacles. And John, I know in your life you've had a really interesting set of chapters in your life. I know your life story well, and I think today would be a great chance to talk a little bit more about that. And you've done some amazing transforming of your own life. You started out with some pretty difficult circumstances and transformed them in by being exposed to teachers, but by learning some really important lessons. I thought maybe I'd ask you first to start by talking a little bit about your early years and what that was like. What was going on in your life?
Right, well, thank you. Well, I do want to say it was a joy to have Mark, and he's going to be a tough act to follow. The opportunities that he brought up about the obstacles that we learned from, I really found meaningful. And now we're turning the tables on me and my little journey. And my journey, I really, some people characterize things, as you mentioned, difficult. I like to think of it as, really chances to really show up in challenging situations that help shape us. So I've had the great opportunity to have a variety of challenges in my life and to be able to really grow from them. The early aspects is, a mom raising 9 kids, single working mom, amazing being. And so she had to work a couple of jobs. She had to go back to school to take care of us. My dad was a great guy, but he passed away when I was very young. So I was raised in an environment with a very loving mom and a big family, but I had my own insecurities and fears, and I had a speech problem. I couldn't talk. So when I was a little kid, no one could understand me. And so there's a lot of insecurity and fear around that. Going to kindergarten, my first day of school, I was petrified. And it was really a traumatic event. I learned how to speak through speech therapy sessions. So it's kind of funny, I speak a lot now, but I didn't know how to speak then. And then just in that atmosphere of being raised with a mom who's, loving and working hard, but lower income. So I wound up in environments around a lot of drugs, alcohol, and violence. And so the methods I used back then to cope and to feel okay and to feel like I could be a part of was really around using drugs and alcohol and running around with, shall we say, unsavory characters, and gang members and sorts. So from Southern California and LA, greater LA area. And so when I was growing up, I was really not a very pleasant person to be around, to say the least. And I really didn't have any sense of sort of happiness or joy in my life. You know, I really struggled to find meaning and to fit in and to be just another school kid.
And drugs and alcohol were one of those ways that you were seeking happiness.
Yeah, you know, I did, you know, early on find that, you know, when I drank some alcohol and I could let go of all the worries, fears, and anxieties in my head. And and for a while that worked, you know. I started really young though. I mean, I was stealing liquor from the liquor store when I was 10, and you know, so it really took me on a path that led to inevitably a lot of suffering and pain. What started off as something that gave me some benefit turned into, you know, a real nightmare, and I really hurt and injured everyone in my life. Anyone that unfortunately cared about me in any way, I wound up hurting. I wound up letting them down and doing a lot of damage to relationships, people I really cared for.
And you ended up having some experiences when you were 19, 20, 21 that were additional layers of pain and suffering.
Yeah, thanks for piling it on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I became a dad at 20.
Yeah.
And that, you know, when I really think about transformative events in our lives, you know, my dad had passed away when I was 6, and for me to become a dad, I really had the thought of, you know, I wanted to be a good person. You know, I really wanted to be a good dad. I didn't know how, and it's really a time I did a deeper reflection on life and what should I do about this. And you know, what resources did I have? You know, I didn't have a lot of skill sets, and my resume, you know, didn't have a lot of opportunities for advancement. And so it's kind of funny, I thought, well, what could I do and be a dad, and how could I get out of this life and lifestyle that I lived? And I came up with joining the Army. That was the best thing, you know. It would get me out of my environment. I'd get an opportunity to get healthy and well, and have an opportunity to maybe go to college. I could become a father and be, you know, a normal person. Didn't pan out.
Right.
Yeah.
You talk about trying to get away also and taking you with you.
Yeah, yeah. So just, following up, you know, I wound up injuring my knee and wasn't able to actually make it into the Army. So I had to look at other things, and I thought, well, I'm going to get away. I'm going to leave town and work on being a better person. And I took me with me. So wherever I went, you know, my same problems, my same habits, my same conditions came with me. And as a result, I wound up not only not being a good father, I wound up losing my daughter, losing my family, you know, again, hurting the people in my life. And you know, there was the night I'll never forget is the night I lost my daughter, you know, and her mom was waiting for her parents to come and take her away. And you know, and what do, you know, good people do at a difficult time? I went out and got drunk with the guys, and I didn't deal with it then. And I came home to losing my daughter, and it was really one of the most painful events of my life. And I'd love to tell you that it changed my life, but you know, even that did not at that point. I lost my daughter, and then what did I do? I felt bad. I felt, you know, pour me another drink. You know, let me go do something else to distract my mind, to take me away from my suffering.
So what was it then, shortly after that, that was your sort of first realization that shifted things in a new direction?
Yeah, so, you know, there's a pivotal moment. There's always, you know, these ideas of moments in our life where we have the opportunity and potential for change. And, you know, a lot of times we pinpoint a moment, but it's always nice for me to think of all the things that led to a moment. And so really it was all the damage I had done that led to this moment. There's a level of pain and suffering that brought me to an opportunity, you know, having lost my daughter and trying to find a way to be a good person, to exist in a way I could look in a mirror and inevitably, through my same habits and conditioning, the next person I cared for, I wound up hurting and losing. And I had this little epiphany. It was almost 31 years ago. It was, I can tell you the day, August 21st, 1984. In the midst of losing again one more person that I loved and cared about, a real moment of realization. And that simple realization we've heard before, but it was real clear to me. And that was that all my pain and suffering did not come from my environment. It didn't come from how I was raised. It didn't come from how life treated me. It didn't come from, you know, the situations. It came from how I was living my life. That the real source of my suffering was here, not out there. And so in that moment, back in 1984, I got also the idea that my happiness and joy will also come from me, not my situation, how I'm living my life. And I came to just the stark realization. It said, if I want to live life, I need to be different. I need to live differently. I need to stop you know, the habits and the tendencies that I had. You know, drugs, alcohol, and violence were not the way to a happy and meaningful life.
And so talk about that role of pain a little bit more as a motivator. I mean, how do we see that in our lives?
Yeah. Well, there's an underlying principle that's taught in life, right? That all human beings want happiness, want to avoid suffering, right? We've heard that. And actually, could be said that all beings, period, you know, animals too, they want to avoid suffering and want happiness, and it's kind of a nature. And what I have found over time is that our real growth in life, I mean, when you think about times in our lives where we've really stepped up and had the opportunity to grow the most, learn the most, really reach our highest potentials, more often than not, they came from painful situations. It's painful situations that make us stop for a moment and ask ourselves, you know, what is the meaning of life? What is the purpose of my life? You know, how am I showing up in this way one more time? And so the idea that, you know, I've worked as a recovery counselor with a lot of people in substance abuse and other levels of problems. And, you know, I never met anyone that showed up for treatment because life was okay.
Right.
Just never met that person.
Not when we, it's not when we seek help.
Right.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, pain is really something that not only is necessary, I mean, it actually serves a purpose. You know, pain tells us in our life what to look at, right? If I'm feeling ill, you know, I need to attend to my body. If I've hurt my knee, you know, there's pain associated. I need to get it treated. Likewise, mental and emotional pain in my life. That arises signaling that, you know, there's some problems. There's some problems that need some attention. And so pain is not really the enemy. And there's an old saying that pain is necessary, but suffering is optional. And that's a different quality. You know, there's a level of suffering, of mental and emotional suffering that takes place that we would say is not necessary at all and is not healthy at all. And it's different from pain, which actually serves a purpose in our life.
So we skipped over a little bit. I mentioned that you've had many chapters in your life. We didn't really run through them, but you've been you've been homeless, you've been an auto mechanic, you mentioned you were a drug and alcohol counselor, you've been a history teacher in a high school in a low-income, rough, violent area, you've been a Buddhist monk in the Tibetan tradition, you've become a layperson again, you're mindfulness teacher, a
Wow, it's a
counselor.
fascinating story, isn't it?
So all these chapters, yeah, a lot of chapters. I'm looking forward to the autobiography when it comes out. But there are, you know, when you think of all the things that you've been exposed to, living in different socioeconomic conditions, traveling around the United States, going to communities all around the United States, meeting people of all different life situations, life paths, faiths, and then living in a refugee settlement in southern India, in a monastery. Can we talk to you a little bit about maybe what you've seen? So you've had this interesting early life and then this path all the way through. What other things have you summarized about what do you see that's common as an obstacle? And then we can talk a little bit about the transformation of that obstacle. But there's some things that are common that you've talked about that are human, that we're challenged by.
Big question.
Yeah.
Right? So the journey of the last, next month will be 31 years, has been one of transformation of, you know, here's a guy that lived under a bridge, and how did he find his way through participating in life in a more meaningful way. And that journey, as you mentioned, took place, you know, delivering auto parts, being an auto mechanic, eventually a counselor, and so forth. And these different roles that ultimately led me to a monastery in India. And so the great sort of piece from that is that I've had this, I think, rare chance to live with a variety of people at different, as you mentioned, socio and economic situations in both the USA and in India. And what I found is that there's some very universal things. You know, whether you have a house or homeless, whether you have a great deal of money. I was once a senior account manager of a management healthcare corporation. I had an expense account. I also lived under a bridge. And what I found is that there's some very basic issues that we all struggle with in our sort of source for inner peace and meaning and purpose in our life and well-being. And when I think about the obstacles, the primary obstacle that is just universal and just pervasive is best explained by one of a great teacher, Alan Wallace, one I've had the great benefit to train with. And he describes it as an obsessive, compulsive, delusional mind. And he says, you know, this is just something it's just pervasive. It's so pervasive, we're just used to it. And let's see how that fits. So all of us, whether we have great income or no income, whether we're educated or not educated, I think we can all relate to the idea that we have a mind that's active, a mind that's busy, so it's obsessive. So a mind that is constantly producing thoughts. That's what a mind does. And for those of us who've ever tried to meditate or focus our attention on something, try to not think for a minute when you're not sleeping. Just try to do that. And you will find it's challenging. Thoughts arise, images arise, you know. You'll be asking yourself, okay, I'm not going to think, what was that thinking? What was that thinking? Now I'm talking to my thinking. And the mind is just going. So we have this mind that's just constantly producing thoughts. And then it says, well, it's compulsive, though. It's compulsive in a sense that it's compulsively drawing our attention away from whatever we're trying to attend to. So, and I think we can all experience this. I like the example of worry. A lot of people worry, right? And I think it's a pretty common thing. You and I could probably both have a conversation about worry and say, well, does worrying make anything better? We might have a discussion about that and philosophically say, you know, worrying about something doesn't seem to help it, you know. If I can do something about it, I'll have the resources and not much to worry about. If I really can't do much about it, worrying about it,
Why worry? Yeah,
right, doesn't seem to help a whole lot. So philosophically, you and I can make that discussion. And we can decide, well, let's just not worry anymore.
Right, absolutely.
Easy, huh?
Yeah. It won't help, let's not do it.
Yeah, let's not worry anymore. Well, philosophically, in my mind, I can get that. But my mind, regardless, can pop up with, hey, you should worry about this. Well, and I can tell myself, well, I'm not going to worry. And the mind will say, well, what about this? Have you thought about this angle? What about this? And so the mind can compulsively draw our attention to stuff that we might worry about, things we might stress over. It also brings our things to things we desire, right, and things we want to avoid. And so it's always got something to say. The mind's always got something to say. One of the videos with Alan giving a talk, what was his line? He said, you know, even if you tell your mind, let's be quiet, the mind will say, well, good, let's talk about that.
Right.
So it's got something to say, but it's compulsively drawing our attention away to whatever it's thinking. So even, and we've all, you know, had this time where I'm not going to worry about this, I'm not going to stress it, I'm not going to think about that, but the mind says, oh yeah, let's do that. Or if you try to meditate, it's funny how the mind will come up with delicious thoughts and things of revelations and, you know, just images. So we have this mind, it's constantly producing thoughts, it's constantly drawing our attention to this or that, and then he's got this aspect of being delusional. Delusional. And delusional means we don't really see the world as it is. It's not very accurate. And, you know, most of us think, well, I see the world as it is. What are you talking about?
Right.
And, but do we really? Do we see the world as it is in a way that's accurate and meaningful, or is our mind telling a lot of stories about what we see and what we think and what we feel and what we hear? And this is the big problem. So, for example, I like to talk about Jimmy the jerk, right? Jimmy the jerk. Is Jimmy a jerk, right? So if I see Jimmy and you know, my mind says, I saw Jimmy, he's a jerk. I saw what he did. Jimmy becomes a jerk. And every time I see Jimmy, what do I think? He's a jerk. There he is. He comes there. I'm not even talking to him. I see him walking by, and I can have a mental just affliction of anxiety. You know, there he is. I hope he didn't come here. He's a jerk. So here's a delusional aspect. Is Jimmy a jerk? Well, I saw Jimmy do one thing that I didn't like. He becomes a jerk. Every time I see him, he's a jerk. He even does something like charity or kindness. I think, well, he's just doing that to impress somebody, because really he's a jerk.
Because you've labeled him.
Right.
And once you've labeled him, what happens?
Well, once he's labeled, then he becomes this label, and that's what he is. And so every time I see him, I'm coming to at a reference of him as a jerk. But if I look at Jimmy's life, is he a jerk most of the time? And I would say probably not. He's probably not a jerk when he wakes up. He's probably not a jerk when he's cooking breakfast. He's probably not a jerk when he's walking his kids to school. He's probably not a jerk when he's, you know, taking the trash out for the neighbors. I mean, all day long, Jimmy's doing things that are not jerky, right? But when I see him, that's all I see. And so my mind is closed to the reality of the truth that Jimmy is a lot of things. Not the one thing.
Not the one thing. So we have this delusion that we develop around other people. What about events and other things as
Events and belief systems, right?
Belief systems.
You know, events have happened in our lives. We tell ourselves stories about our life, right?
Yeah, we're good at that, aren't we?
We're great storytellers,
Yeah.
you know? And there's, you know, it's a rich topic. We have a short period of time. One of my favorite ways that I like to acknowledge of being delusional in storytelling and events in our life is any sentence that starts with if. You know, my mom had the pearl of wisdom that I have carried on throughout my life. My mom would say, you know, when I'd say, well, if this would happen, then, you know, it would have been different. She'd say, well, if frogs had wings, they would not bump their fannies.
Right.
Her point being, frogs don't have wings. And when you start a sentence with if, you are already delusional because it didn't happen.
Yeah, especially when you're talking about the past.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
if I would have gone to college, this would have been different if I had done this, but we didn't.
Yeah, how much do we torture ourselves with the idea of if? You know, if we tell our story, you know, if I, as you mentioned, let's take the college one you just mentioned. You know, if only I had gone to college and I got this degree, I would have this great life. And we actually think that might be true, right? We tell people, I made this choice. And, well, first place, if you would have gone to college, who knows what would have happened?
Right.
You might have been hit by a car crossing the street. If you'd gone to college, you know, you might have found a totally different path and done something different.
Yeah.
It never happened. It never happened. There's no basis in reality. And everything about it is just a story of what could have been. And we often torture ourselves with, if only I had done this different.
So that's another way we're delusional. So just to wrap this up a little bit, so you're talking about this pervasive obstacle that we have, which is that we're obsessively thinking, that our minds are obsessively thinking, they're compulsively drawing us into those thoughts, and then in many ways we're delusional about the way we experience our reality, the way we think about it. So maybe we can talk about that more in a future show, and it's a lot to unpack and to understand and to have examples about. So to wrap up each week, we also give a habit of happiness that we suggest our viewers try out for the week, and wanted to invite you to share one.
Sure, absolutely. You know, just summarizing this whole little piece of you know, our biggest thing to transform is our mind and what we pay attention to. And so if we were to transform our mind, we start paying attention with our own consciousness to things that we think are important and not telling stories around them, and that being the biggest obstacle. So what I'd like to do is invite the guests this week to pay attention this week to something that is meaningful to you. So pick a value that is important in your life. So there's many, you know, honesty, generosity, kindness, trustworthiness, whatever that value is. Take some time and think about a value each day. So pick one that's important to you and put your mind on that value. Think about how throughout the day, call it to mind. Start in the morning, bring this value, consciously think, I'm going to live this day with this value. And then consciously bring it to mind in how it interacts in your relationships and how you can grow it and how it works in your own life. And that, I think, would be an incredible habit of happiness. That, for me, 31 years ago, was the opportunity to start thinking about what's truly important and bring that to mind instead of having my mind drag me around to a lot of stories.
Right, because we often don't even think about our values. We sort of operate on autopilot throughout the day. And this act of remembering, sort of calling to mind value, is very helpful, isn't it, throughout a day? We can really look at how it plays in our actions and how we use it in our interactions with other people as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the big problem is we have a distracted mind taking us away from what's really important in our life. That's the obstacle.
How do we have a meaningful life if we don't pay attention to those values in the moments of our day? Yeah.
And what's more important than asking ourselves, what's important?
Right. Right.
Yeah, not a bad way to start your day.
Not bad. Not bad.
Okay, so thanks so much for turning the tables on me, and I do look forward to our next session where I think we're going to really unpack what it is to live meaningfully and a mindful life in a way that can really cultivate genuine happiness. I believe it's called the 4 Keys of Living Mindfully.
Yes, I look forward to that episode as well. Thanks so much, and I hope our viewers have enjoyed this show, and we hope that you have a wonderful week and try out that habit. Habits of Happiness is sponsored and hosted by the Mindful Life program. The Mindful Life program helps people engage in life in healthy and meaningful ways, reducing stress while cultivating genuine happiness. They offer programs locally, internationally, and online. More information at www.mindfullifeprogram.org or 970-633-0163.
Habits of Happiness is also sponsored by Paradise Bakery, located in the heart of Aspen on the corner of Galena and Cooper. A favorite hangout since 1981. Famous for fresh-baked cookies and muffins, serving homemade Italian-style ice cream, lattes, and fine coffees. Open daily from 6:30 a.m. to 11 p.m.